Hello, everyone, and welcome to another one of our sessions of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute. That is PBBI from California State University, Fresno. We're very excited about this session. As you can see, we have two ladies from our community, two women of success from our community who are involved in education, and it is going to be our way of kicking off, launching this new initiative for the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute from California State University of Fresno, entitled Portuguese-American Educators Leadership Network. It is an education leadership and mentorship network that we want to establish in the Portuguese-American community at a national level through, of course, Fresno State and the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, PBBI. So once again, we want to thank all of the sponsors that are part of what we do at PBBI, and that is the Luso American Development Foundation, FLAD, who has done lots of work on behalf of education, especially between Portugal and the United States, and the government of the autonomous region of the Azores, who has also, for a small region of only less than 250,000 people, the governments of the Azores, independently of their political persuasion, have always done a wonderful job in trying to connect the communities, in trying to connect the Azorean diaspora with the Azores itself. And so we are very happy to have both Dr. Linda Carvalho-Cooley and Ashley Fagundes on with us today. And I see that our good friend, Dr. David Ross, is also here with us. David and Elsa Ross, who have been educators at the Fresno area for many years, and we are so thankful for all of their service. And hopefully, and thanks to all of you who are joining us through the various social media platforms. Thanks to all the groups who have agreed to carry on live as well. And of course, our event will be recorded and be part of the Portuguese Oral History archive at the Henry Madden Library at Fresno State. I'm going to start by asking our two invitees I know some of you already know who they are, but some of you might not, for them to tell us a little bit about themselves, their educational trajectory, how they got to where they're at, and of course, their connection with the Portuguese-American community. So I'll start with Dr. Linda Carvalho-Cooley. Good friend Linda, who I've known her dad for many, many years, and her mom Elvira as well, who's still alive, and thankfully her father passed away a few years ago, and who was a radio icon in the Portuguese community. Not just radio, it was at a time, as Linda and I had a fascinating conversation here about a year and a half ago, that has recorded as part of our Portuguese oral history collection. Radio personalities were part of our family. They were not just someone who spoke on the radio. So Linda, welcome.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you again for including me in Portuguese Beyond Borders. I'm always happy to be a part of what you're building here. I think it's wonderful. So I am, the title doctor still seems a little strange to me, but
but you are one, use it, please.
I am. I am. I came to education later because, and I think that maybe some of our Portuguese female listeners will recognize the storyline, but I got married and had children, and that took priority over education. Although my father was a proponent of education, he wasn't too pushy about it for his daughter to pursue it. He was quite happy having grandchildren, and so it was something that was put back on the back burner for me. But I knew pretty early on that I was going to probably go into education because I love teaching catechism, and I taught American citizenship with my father. So education was definitely something I was interested in. And then when I went back to school, I really thought I was going to go into business, but education just kept pulling me. And communication studies specifically became something that just totally hooked me. So I went, for those of you who are in the Central Valley, I did attend College of the Sequoias, where I earned my associate degree, transferred to Fresno State, where I earned my bachelor's in communication studies. And then I went on to pursue my master's also in the communication studies program at Fresno State. I then went into the workforce. I was teaching I'm a full-time professor at Reedley College, which is part of the State Center Community College District. And I occasionally teach at Fresno State for fun. I did then end up going back to pursue my doctorate, which was just something that I wanted to do for me. And I obtained my doctorate, and I do teach still full-time at Reedley College, but I absolutely moonlight at Fresno State, just teaching upper division courses for the pure love of teaching and getting to do research with students, which is super, super fun. Education was something that totally drastically changed my world, my life. It became something that is not really separate from me. I think that's why my hobby is teaching upper division courses, because it's just something that I think it's really important to pass that on to students, that love and that passion for a topic. I think you just went career at this point, right, Denise?
Sure, that's fine. And you mentioned a little bit, of course, your connection with the Portuguese-American community through your father and your mom, right?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit in a nutshell about your dad.
So my father was a Portuguese radio broadcaster. He was, I used to say, the Dick Clark of the Portuguese community, but now my students don't know who that is. So it's more of a Ryan Seacrest, I guess. I don't know. He had a radio program. He had 2 radio programs. He also would sit in on other radio programs as well. There was a network of radio broadcasters, Portuguese radio broadcasters in the Central Valley that were all friends, and they would help each other. And certainly if we were in the Azores, other people would help him with his program. He would help others as well. He had a business as well where he helped people become American citizens, and he did notary work, and he sold cars, and he sold insurance. He was the master of ceremonies at a lot of weddings, at a lot of baptisms, at funerals. He was very active in the community. He even had his own, not really a festa, we used to call it an acto de variedades, where he would do like a variety show, very similar to like Carnival that they do in Terceira, with little skits and performances. He was very much a part of that community. And I never really thought about it. I never thought about the magnitude and how much he did for the Portuguese community, because it was just part of our world. And it certainly did set a foundation of who I became and that cultural aspect that I take into my classroom even today. And if I can, just quickly, I want to say that I'm really excited about this particular project, because my husband and I were even talking about it. I mean, this is something that really should have been established maybe 30 years ago, 40 years ago even. We've moved away from, we don't have as many Portuguese immigrants as we used to. Obviously, back in the 60s, there was a huge influx of Portuguese-Americans, Portuguese immigrants who came to the United States. And at that time, they kind of congregated together and helped each other find jobs and find homes, and help navigate society in the United States and in Canada. And what has happened is now we don't have as many immigrants for several reasons, but certainly because Portugal, the Azores specifically, is a much different place than it was back then. But because we've gotten a little further away from it, I think that it's so important that we reach out to each other and keep our culture, our stories alive and connected. And I think that this is a great way to do it, to support each other and to mentor people into the educational fields.
Thank you. Very, very eloquently said. And thanks for your input, and of course for your story, your magnificent story. Ashley, same from your end, your trajectory in education and your tie to the Portuguese-American community.
Sure. So, hello everybody. My name is Ashley Fagundes. I currently work as an academic counselor at Fresno State. My kind of life in education, I guess, has been, I myself am actually originally from Atwater. And so after high school, I went to Merced College and earned my associate's degree. I think maybe Linda and I were on the same path, because I got my associate's degree in ag business, and I am not a business person, so I'm not quite sure why I did that. But I actually changed my major 6 times. So I was kind of all over the place. but I actually ended up at Fresno State after that, and I earned my bachelor's degree in communications as well. So we have that in common. And I, like Linda, just fell in love with it. Like I said, I had already changed my major 5 times, and it was just a general ed class that I was going to, and I don't know what something gravitated me towards it. And I remember walking to the building, changing my major, because that's when you had to do it, paper and pen. So earned my bachelor's in communications, and then went on to earn my master's in counseling. And same from Fresno State. So I'm a double alumni from Fresno State. Education has kind of always been in my life. My father actually attended Fresno State, and he taught ag in the Central Valley for over 30 years, and then went on to teach some different classes in high school. He even taught at Fresno State. He taught at Merced College. So education was always something that was pushed upon my sister and I. So I think that we're fortunate in that regard, because as mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily something that's always encouraged, especially amongst female Portuguese Americans. And in our family, it was a little bit different. I definitely have, uncles that never even made it to 8th grade, so we have a very wide spectrum in our family as far as education is concerned. But for myself, it was always something that wasn't really optional. Like, we're going to college and that was it. So which I appreciate. And I think with my dad working in education, and my mom ended up working in education as well, in like administrative roles at the elementary school level. But I think that that's something that I knew I always wanted to do something in education. I just didn't know in what role. And I've now been in academic counseling for 11 years. 12 years, for 12 years. 8 years at Fresno State, and I absolutely love it. And my tie to the Portuguese community, my father's family is from St. George. My mom's family is from Chiseda. I was born and raised in Atwater, which has a huge Portuguese-American community. I always tease Denise that I was raised on the Festa circuit, danced folklore till I was in my 20s. I mean, you name it, we did it. Had the matanzas, everything. So it's always kind of been a part of who I am, which I absolutely embrace and love. And when I discovered PBBI a couple years ago, I threw my name in the hat and wanted to be as involved as possible, because there is something unique about the Portuguese-American community and the pride we have, and the instant connection based on the fact that you may have some of the same values and some of the same traditions. And I think tying it all together with having an education network is fantastic. I know Denise is big about pushing the Portuguese language in high schools, and I'm so jealous of the high schools that had Portuguese, because my high school did not, and I never learned Portuguese. So it's one of those things that, I wish that my son now could learn it and things like that. So I love how much it's grown just at Fresno State in the last few years, from all of Denise's hard work and everybody that supports this program. And I think if we can take it to a national level, the possibilities are fantastic, and we can really hopefully support and encourage a lot of people to, know that education is an option for them, and just give them the different paths. Everybody's path may look different, but the end result can still be something they're proud of.
Indeed, we should have had your mom and dad move you from Atwater to Hillmar, where everybody's Portuguese. I mean, if there's a lot of Portuguese in Atwater, it's like 42% of the population of Hillmar.
Yep.
and they have Portuguese classes since elementary now. So
I spent a lot of time in Hilmar. I was in a dance group that was from Hilmar.
Oh. And so let me ask you one question, though. You said that your dad is in education. That's, of course, fascinating because he's an immigrant. So he came. When did he come? As a young man from the island of São Jorge?
So he was born here. His parents were born there. He was born here.
He was already born here. Okay.
Yeah. He's retired now. Although I tease him, I say you're busier now than when you were working. But yeah, he went to Fresno State actually, and he taught ag the majority of his career through Merced High School and Golden Valley High School, and then ended up teaching like some other classes for a continuation high school and things like that. And then he actually taught the welding classes at Merced College and Fresno State.
So he was first generation born in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that aspect. I mean, it's one of the great things about the California State University system, and of course, and the junior colleges. I think the junior colleges are kind of the best kept secret that some people in Portugal don't understand, but there's 117 of them throughout California, and they are the saving grace for many students, including for myself when I was a return student as well. I didn't have the opportunity to go to college because I had to go to work, and so many people in my generation had the same thing. We had to go to work. It's not that our parents didn't treasure or and believe in education. It's just that they had just come from Portugal, and they had only been here 3 or 4 years, and so it was expected that you needed to help. And at the beginning, especially as Linda mentioned, in the 1960s, when we came in 1968, and even those who came in the 70s, early 70s, especially those who came in the 60s, it already changed in Portugal a little bit in the 70s. But those who came at that time, there was always the dream of you're going to America just for a little while, just to make enough money to come back and buy a few cows and establish something. And so that little while, those maybe 6 to 8 years ended up being 60 years or forever. And so so that's why a lot of people my generation didn't have the opportunity to go to college. And so the community colleges are an excellent venue for those returning, because we all need to find out what we want to do. And they're much closer physically. And they are a truly unique American initiative and great throughout the state of California. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about the empowerment of education. Our community now is much different than what it was in 1960s, or when Ashley's grandparents immigrated, or when your parents immigrated. Your dad, Linda, I'm pretty sure that Dona Elvita was already born here, or when my parents and I immigrated in the 1960s, which was the last wave of immigration that came from 1958 to 1976 to 80. And so this empowerment that has happened in our community that you see through education, as an educator, Linda, do you see it now in other immigrant communities that are newer than ours, or some that have just arrived recently? Because we see a lot of first generation students, whether it be at the community college or at the CSU level. And for me, it's always gratifying as a teacher, and I was a high school teacher that was my career for over 2 decades. As a teacher, it's always gratifying to see and how the first immigrant student, the first generation of immigrant students coming to a school setting, whether even in high school, it was I've always had a special bond with Hispanic students. I still do, because they're going through the same thing I went in 1968, and they had just gone through, maybe 10 years ago. So tell us a little bit about that, as someone who is a daughter and a granddaughter of immigrants, one side a daughter and the other side a granddaughter, and now teaching in college. How do you see that as a way to build up community and to give empowerment to immigrant communities, including what we have gone through in the Portuguese community?
Well, first of all, my father was, he immigrated. I'm the first gen, but my father he was adamant to get a high school diploma in the United States, which I think sort of set the stage for education being important for me. So he did that. And then he went to COS and graduated. He did get an associate degree, which was difficult for him, you know, with the second language learning and still running a business and having a family. But it showed how incredibly important just getting that paper to prove that you could do that and be successful at it. I think it's really interesting that you said how much you identify with the first-gen Hispanic students. I absolutely identify with first-gen Hispanic students. And I think that it's really fascinating when I tell my story to my students, and that's the beauty of communication that I think lured Ashley in to comm studies, is that we're very genuine, we're very real. We talk about ourselves, we talk about our lives, which allows us to talk about our culture. And I think when I talk about being raised in a Portuguese Catholic household, my Hispanic girls in the classroom quickly identify, and we have a lot of the same similar stories. And what's happened is it's allowed me an avenue to talk about my culture, and it's allowed me a way to connect with my students, but it's also done something really interesting. Going back to what Ashley said about Portuguese people and their pride in their culture, my Portuguese students speak up. And in a way, Portuguese-American students have been somewhat a little bit more invisible, because that's not the new wave of immigrants. And so what happens is I get a lot of students saying, I'm Portuguese. And on my father's side, you know, my grandfather, you know, and they go back home and they start asking, because of course I'm going to ask what island they're from, because I want to know, or if they're from the mainland. And so that conversation allows people to discuss it. And I think it opens the door for connection and an ability to be proud of your heritage and to learn more about it. And I think that young people look to their teachers and to role models, whether they're on TV or wherever, they look for role models, and they want to recognize themselves. They want to see a connection. So I think that when a teacher mentions their story, even if it's not the same exact ethnicity, if there's a connection, they kind of see themselves like, I can do this too. And I think that makes a big difference. There is a distinction though, and Ashley can probably speak to it better than I can, although I sat on a doctoral dissertation that was about this and I should know more. But there's a difference between the definition of first generation at Fresno State or university level than there is first generation at the community college level. And that distinction, sometimes students think, oh, I don't qualify for it here, but they don't recognize that they do there. And I can't remember which one it is, and maybe Ashley knows more than I do as a counselor, but one of them is that your parent didn't attend college at all. And I believe the other one is that they had to have graduated or they had taken some classes. One of them sees first gen, you're not a first gen if your parents took college classes, and one sees it as it doesn't matter as long as they didn't graduate. So I can't remember what the distinction is, but there's a reason why first gen is so important to get to those students. These are students who don't have an older brother or sister or a parent who went through the process, and registering for college, figuring out a major, figuring out financial aid, all of those things are daunting. And if you don't have someone in your home that you can turn to and say, I don't know, what is FAFSA? What does this mean? Or how do I do this? You're at a disadvantage, which is why the first gen programs are so valuable, because they get students into the college classroom and empower them to complete their degree.
Do you think that by being in your case, a first gen born here in the United States, because you had one parent who was immigrant, do you think it gives you a different, and even your cultural background? You're Portuguese, whether your parent was an immigrant or your grandparents were immigrants, but you were raised, you know, in a Portuguese setting, as Ashley said, doing the Festa circuit, and in your case, you know, doing the Portuguese radio circuit. The being raised in a very ethnic setting in mainstream America, but in an ethnic setting with constant contact because you were fortunate, you and your brother, that you got to go with your parents and visit Portugal and the Azores several times. Do you think that gave you an upper hand and a different empathy level towards these students who also came from a different background and now are trying to, fit in America?
Absolutely. And I think helping my father teach American citizenship for many years, my father always told me that an accent is not a sign of someone's intellect, and to see beyond those things because they're people. And I think that I look at all of my students with that same potential, and I see them as someone who's trying and someone who's working towards something. And I definitely think I connect with them more. And I think that, being Portuguese, we have white privilege, right? We can like blend into society and people don't know, are you Spanish? Are you Portuguese? Are you Italian? What are you? They're not quite sure, but we just kind of fit in. And you're juggling two very different worlds, because it's not when you're part of that Festa circuit and you're part of the Portuguese radio, if that's part of your world, you're very connected to your ethnicity, you have that life, and then you have your American school life. Mm-hmm. I'm sure, Ashley, you had friends, if they didn't know Portuguese people, they're like, what are you doing with a pig? What's a matanza? Matanza? What? They have no idea. And I've mentioned this, I know, to Denise before, but there's this element of you kind of weighing what you're going to share and what you're not going to share. You're proud, but at the same time, you don't want to be seen as different or othering yourself. And I think that when you become an educator and you're as old as I am, you're welcome. You're just like completely open about that, and you're willing to talk about it. And I think that's what allows students to then want to connect with you and talk about their culture.
Indeed, wonderful thoughts there for sure. Ashley, in your role as academic counselor, so having that Portuguese connection, although your dad was born here, but grandparents that immigrated, and having a connection to maybe being forced, maybe you didn't want to go dance in the folklore. And I say that only because my kids were forced to go dance in the folklore. It was the best thing I did because they really didn't want to. They loved the Portuguese marching band because they both love music, but they did not like the folklore, and they did it for 2.5 years. But being involved in these cultural aspects, does it help you with your job? Connecting, of course, because we do a lot, and I mean, we, not me, but we, as in a institution at Fresno State, we do a lot really for Portuguese, for first generation students, and we really concentrate on them trying to be successful in their academic careers because it's so important for them to be successful.
Yeah, definitely. So my role is a little bit more unique too, because my main focus of students are students who come to Fresno State as undeclared majors. They don't know what they want to major in. And the likelihood that they're first gen is very high, because we have like almost 70% of our students, I think at this point, are considered first gen. So they almost have like those two, I don't want to call them barriers, but those two factors to consider. Like, I'm first gen, and like Linda mentioned, what is FAFSA? What are all, like, you come to a university and you have to learn to speak another language because they like expect you to know what's happening at all times. But and then to not have a major, right? Like, okay, I'm at this place, but I don't even know what path I'm on or where I want to go. And so in my role, and I have no problem sharing my story with students either, and explaining, like, I changed my major 6 times. Yes, it took me 6 years to earn a bachelor's degree, but I still got it. Like, it's not a race, And so just making them understand that, again, like, everybody's path looks different. And I always will tell my students that I was always jealous of my friends, like, that graduated high school and knew like exactly where they were, what college they were going to, what they were going to major in, what they were doing after that. And I was like, I'm going to go to community college because I have no idea. Right. And I think sometimes when students me education, it can be a little intimidating because they think that we had this like smooth path, right? That we just from A to B, B to C, and it's like I was from like A to L and L to Z and back to A, like all over the place. And I don't think that sometimes that's the first thing that they think of. And then same thing with like different cultural traditions and things like that. Like in my office on campus, I have pictures of places that I've visited, and that always ends up being like some point of conversation because there's tons of countries up there. And it's just a way, to connect to students. And the office that I work in also, we house like our dream center. So for students that are dreamers. So we see a lot of first gen dreamer students. And so my main goal with students is to make them feel comfortable and know that they have somebody there. Fresno State is amazing and has so many resources, but it is so overwhelming, especially for somebody who doesn't speak the higher education lingo, And so I always want students to realize like I've been there and connecting them to people who can also relate to their story, I think is really important because especially being like undecided on a major, you already feel lost. So it's like, hey, you kind of need to have a support system. So it's definitely something I deal with regularly.
Indeed. And although we have no longer, as was mentioned by both of you, first gen, when I mean first gen immigrant students, from Portugal, most of the kids, most of the young people going to college now from the Portuguese-American community, it was their grandparents or their great grandparents that immigrated. Very few were immigrants themselves. I mean, almost next to none. That wasn't the case, of course, 40 or 50 years ago, but today it's mostly their grandparents or their grandparents that were immigrants. And so when we thought, and I appreciate both of you and all that you're sharing, when we thought about, forming, and I want to share the Portuguese-American Educators Leadership Network, PBBI Fresno State. This is just a form that we've put together through Google Forms. Those of you who know education know Google, and so they're kind of a part. And so we wanted to build an education network of Portuguese of ancestry, educators of Portuguese ancestry in the U.S., connecting and recognizing and empowering, of course, everyone. And so as I stop sharing this, just wanted people to see the logo there. And I want to thank for both of you for embarking on this. We've talked about this very, very briefly, and it may not be fair to you that I put you on a spot like this, but I'm going to. How do you see a network like this being useful for our community? And I think that a network like this, of course, maybe, and not maybe, it should have started maybe 50 years ago. Like many things, like our oral history should have started 50 years ago. I would have been able to have an interview with Antonio Carvalho instead of his daughter, and then with his daughter later on. And so now we're getting stories a lot, secondhand. When I mean secondhand, we're getting them by the sons and daughters and by the grandchildren and even the great grandchildren of immigrants. So had we done oral history 50 or 60 years ago, or started it, 40 or 50 years ago, it would have been different. We'd have had a lot more firsthand accounts, but we can't change the past. We can't go back and do that. Does it, first of all, make sense to you to put forth an educators network, even though Portuguese Americans now are mostly going to college, or mostly sons or mostly grandsons or granddaughters of immigrants? And how can we together as a community empower those who are going to education, maybe even at times, as Ashley said, explain the lingo of higher ed, which I'm still learning. And every time I think I learned something, I didn't learn it quite the way it is now. It was different, last year. And so, but my thought here is, and I want to get your thoughts on it. I've always believed in an educators network, and I used to be part of a Portuguese language teachers network, and that no longer exists, the one I was part of anyway. But I think it's important to bring all educators, whether you teach science at high school or communications in college, or you teach literature for a PhD students, or you teach first grade EL students. We all have something in common, and that is our ancestry, whether we are first, second, third, or fourth generation. So we have this ancestry, we have the passion for education, the love for education, or else we aren't in it. And so how can we build this bond together? And I thought it would be a wonderful way also to showcase, maybe have 2 or 3 events a year where we showcase 2 or 3 different educators, and maybe take an issue. I don't know what you think about that. Maybe take an issue that it's important right now, or is at the forefront in education, and get the perspective from a Portuguese-American perspective of a college professor, of an elementary school teacher, of an administrator in a school district, anywhere. And Portuguese-Americans have come a long way. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on that, because it might have been tougher easier in one way, but tougher in another way, to do a Portuguese-American Educators Leadership Network 50 years ago, but because there weren't that many, very few. But today, and a friend of mine and I, it's been about 3 or 4 months ago, that's when I started talking about this project to myself, and then, got Linda and Ashley on board. Just in Tulare, her and I, we sat together and started counting. Just in Tulare, we counted 44 teachers that both of us knew that are Portuguese background, 44, just in the Tulare City and Tulare High School district. And so if you multiply that by other cities, and we're talking about just the Valley, if you multiply that by Hanford, by Atwater, by Merced and Turlock, and then you multiply that by the other parts of the state, and by Fall River, Massachusetts, and New Jersey and Florida, et cetera, I think that we have such a rich group that we could all share our knowledge in our respective communities and at a national level as well. But I'd like to get your thoughts on that, Linda. How can we, why should Portuguese Americans join this group? It's free of charge, first of all, so at least, there's not a charge.
You're not going to charge $2 so
that the Portuguese birthday? Radio.
That way I get my birthday now.
My dad always used to pay Carvalho more, because he said, he helps me out a lot, so I'm going to give him $10. He was very generous. But anyway, and
the older people are going to get that.
Yeah, I know. No, only people that are over 50 will probably get this part of the Portuguese radio. But indeed, yeah, it used to be $1, and then it became $2 a year to become members of a Portuguese radio. And you used to go to a festa for $1, and they used to give you coffee and massa cevada.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's no charge, but why should? So if you're a Portuguese-American educator somewhere, why should you belong to a group like this? What a network, what can a network do? If you were asked to be part of it, and what are some of the possibilities that you in your mind, and you were earlier talking before we got on, you were talking with your husband about it. What are some of the possibilities that you in your mind feel that we can do with this?
I think networking is always a wonderful idea, to connect, to learn best practices, to learn ideas, to learn suggestions, especially since we just went through a pandemic, and a couple of good things came out of it. One is that we are far more connected via Zoom and automated or online formats, which allows us to kind of break some barriers that we don't have to meet in a hall, right? We can meet online and discuss ideas. So I think networking is really important. The other thing that I think would be really, really cool about this is also keeping the culture, the education of the culture alive. And what better than to have rooms full of educators talking about keeping the education of our own culture? Because the further we get away, right, from the lineage, sometimes we do things because that's just the way we've done them, not necessarily know why. And I think that one of the things that we could do is to have discussions about sort of the history of some of our rituals, some of our symbols, and why they're important and sacred to us. And I think that, so there could be an educational element. The other thing is, like I said, we need to look at role models for our students. And I know when I was at Reedley, we did an international poetry day. And so I read a couple of Portuguese poems, and then I gave them the translation. And these are students sitting there. We actually did it in Afrikaans. I can't pronounce the language, but it's from South Africa. There was somebody doing French, somebody doing Spanish. I did Portuguese, somebody did Russian. We had all these different languages. But wouldn't it be beautiful to have a group of, English teachers come together and to look at short stories from the Portuguese experience, to introduce Portuguese poems to our students, just having that network of people who say, I did this in my class, and it was a great way to introduce something from the Portuguese culture, but yet it still fits into the curriculum. So I think that would be really powerful, and I think that we could get some great ideas. But I'd also really like to see it be, in a way, educational for us as well. I think that people could get something out of it as far as personal knowledge, because I always think that if you grow as a person, then you don't mind helping other people grow. I think it's important to feed ourselves as well. In addition to that, you might need a future student teacher needs a teacher to be a mentor and would like to sample or try a different area. This would be a network that they could connect with people, that could connect them with other people. It's a great way to get internships. It's a great resource for shadowing somebody. So if you're thinking about going into education, you have someone who's considering it, this would be a place where they could actually reach out and go, I really want to shadow a college professor who does this. It would be a system that we could connect with. It would also just be fascinating to find how their culture plays out in their role as whatever, whether it's an administrator, whether it's a counselor, whether it's a faculty member, and kind of where those lessons came from, and just having discussions. I think it would be fascinating. And there are a lot of Portuguese Americans who are doing this work. So why not find a way to connect us? I think other cultures do it. Other ethnicities already have this in place. I think that we're missing out by not connecting with each other.
Some very good points, and I love the example about maybe getting together for, as you said, some English high school students, or English high school teachers, or English in junior high school who are of Portuguese background, and how can we incorporate a short story when you're teaching short stories of the world? How can we incorporate a short story of a Portuguese American, or a short story of a Portuguese famous writer that's been translated? Most of them have been translated to English. That is exactly how I feel we're going to maintain the culture. If we do not mainstream it, if it is not part of our children and our grandchildren's everyday life, it's going to die, because eventually grandmother dies. And when grandma dies, a lot of times the stories die with her or him. And I mean more grandma, because we always like grandma better than we like grandpa. And so when grandma dies, when the vol goes, a lot of times the stories go. And so I believe that we can only, that's just wonderful. How can we, hopefully that is one of the achievable goals, is getting a group of teachers in their subject matter, of course.
I think there's probably educators who are Portuguese, and they know that they're Portuguese descendants. They may have even gone to some festas, but they really don't know the significance or the story. They know what they kind of heard, but maybe it's not as accurate. So it would be really good for us to remain educated on our culture, and make sure that the story we're telling is the story, or what the symbolism is. I think we would learn, which would enrich our own knowledge of our culture, but it could also be something that we share.
Indeed. Yes, it can be a network of that as well. Very, very well put. And I love the idea of the short stories, the idea of mentorship, the idea of learning from each other, the idea of keeping alive those symbols and traditions, and as educators of learning a little bit more background about them. That's very, very important. I'm teaching it's not actually a teaching, it's just a lecture at Fresno State, the OLE program, about the Kingdom of Portugal. And it's been fascinating, because most of my students, or most of the folks taking it, they're just people who like lifelong learning. They're not Portuguese, or they're Portuguese of third generation. And they ask all the questions about all the kings, and why this king do this and why that king do that. And so we do have, for a very small country, as I just said today to in that class, when we went out to kind of do what we did in the world, the age of exploration, which there were some bad things, we all know, but there was a lot of good things as also. So we did this as a country of less than 1 million people. I mean, that was one of the reasons Portugal discovered so much area, but then it did not have people to populate it. So these are stories that we need to keep alive. And even today, I know that Linda has the opportunity to go to Portugal quite often. She has a home in Terceira, but most educators and most people don't. And so they either have never been to Portugal or they've been to Portugal once on a week-long trip, where they went to 4 different islands or 3 different cities, and they don't have that experience, because what's happening in modern day Portugal is just really amazing, with the music, with the art, and hopefully as educators we can bring that together. Ashley, your thought: what can this group do? What can a network like this do for educators, for future educators, for students? In your case, as an academic counselor, some of the thoughts that you might have in this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as educators, we are naturally lifelong learners. And so we thrive off of like networking and learning from each other and hearing each other's stories. And so I think as far as, growing the network, I think it will organically happen because of the population that we're talking to, right? That being said, I think it would open the doors for so many things, for especially students, or even, people that are already working in education. But I think of my students, and if they could gain, the opportunity to go do research in another state or in another country, or go get an internship. I know, Denise, you emailed me about that one internship. What if we had a network to reach out to, in our hands right there for that internship opportunity, future job opportunities, or, if just connecting them with somebody that can be a mentor, can be a guide, as well as be relatable as far as traditions, and educating them more about those traditions, learning more about those traditions. But I think, in order, I know you said this probably wouldn't have happened 50 years ago, and yeah, maybe it wouldn't have, maybe it would have been really small, but I think now is a prime time to do it. And the more you water something, the more it's going to grow, right? So I do think that this is something that will kind of organically grow. And I know I'm very excited to be a part of it, and honored, honestly. I not only American, but I take pride in being an educator as well. And I think if we can all support each other, it'll be great to help our students, even in the younger grades. They don't have to be in college already, so there's a lot of opportunity.
Indeed, that's and it's you brought up a good point, Ashley, which is sometimes as a Portuguese-American educator, teaching 4th grade or 5th grade, when you do your multicultural week, having a network that you can pull, because as Linda mentioned today, we can use Zoom, having a network that you can pull a teacher to talk about. Let's say you want to do something on Northern Portugal and you don't have somebody in the valley that's from Northern Portugal, but we have an education network, and we have someone who's either an immigrant or 1st or 2nd gen from Northern Portugal in Newark, New Jersey. And with the network, you can bring him or her into your classroom for your students to have that opportunity to connect, because indeed, as both of you mentioned, Zoom has and all the other platforms have brought us together in a lot of aspects. And I know people are tired of it. We were tired as educators because our lives were only on Zoom. Mine is still a lot on Zoom, but I still have, I have a class that I teach twice a week. So I'm with students 4 hours a week in person. And so I believe that as people get back to more in-person events, we're going to be apt to not mind doing a Zoom once in a while because it's not part of what we do all the time. So it's okay to do a Zoom here and there, but it can bring this wealth of information together and use everyone from in education. I'm thinking not just people in the classroom setting, but I'm thinking of academic counselors, the high school counselors. I'm thinking about EL educators, English language learners, educators, not only the educators, but also their TAs or assistants. I mean, they have a world of knowledge. And so we can bring all of this together and hopefully indeed mentor those going into education, because sometimes it is scary to go into an education. I had a friend of mine who once told me, and especially at the high school and even elementary school level, and not that different at college level, which is education is kind of a lonely job, because once you close that door, it's just you and those students. And, we don't have a lot of time to exchange ideas in a loose setting. And hopefully, this can also serve as that, because a lot of the professional development or the meetings that we all go to, and some of them are more enjoyable than others, but most of them are kind of required, or all of them. And this would be kind of in a more relaxed and fun and open setting where people can be, if something is to be discussed, you can discuss it with open feeling without having to be fearful of any repercussions that might happen in a professional kind of setting. Linda, add some to it, please.
Yeah, I think it might be also interesting too, if educators are wanting to move like into administration, to have some administrators who could kind of walk them through what they went through, what to expect. People who are applying for a full-time teaching position, having somebody, having a panel that discusses this is what, the process looks like, or what the process might look like. I think those kinds of things as well would be, I think those would be incredibly valuable, just to have even small panels that could present and talk about some of the challenges of being an administrator, some of the challenges of evaluating other teachers. Any of those things. I mean, I think it's kind of open. We could do anything.
Sure. And so on our form that we will be, it's a Google form, and it'll be open, and we'll try to, this is not the good format to put it out, because, people have to click on it. But there is actually, and the three of us work on a little bit more, of course.
The link though. You
Yes,
could put the link.
I could. That's a good idea. I could put the link
like on the whiteboard or something. And then that way they could.
I will put the link on everything that we are going to share, including on the YouTube when we archive and everything else. I believe that we want to ask also educators what are 3 or 4 things that you'd like to accomplish in this group, because we want it to be education. We want it to be driven by those who belong to the network. There's not a president, a vice president, a secretary, a treasurer, a senior queen and a junior queen, and the site attendants. So there isn't all that hierarchies of things. It's going to be a very not a vertical at all, but a very horizontal kind of a network where everyone is on the same footing with different experiences, because we all do, but everyone has equal say, and I think we can do a lot of things, and especially what you mentioned there also, Linda, administration. Thank God that we are finally getting Portuguese Americans into administration. Portuguese Americans in school boards are so important, because a lot of policy decisions are made there. We are coming upon a very important thing here for California high school students in the next few years. I think by 2025, if I'm not mistaken, which every single high school student will have to have completed a ethnic studies semester course. And so if we don't have, obviously we are not the big Hispanic community or the big Asian community or African-American community. Our experiences are different, and we are smaller. We're 350,000 in California, but we should have 1 or 2 lesson plans that a teacher can grab onto and teach about the Portuguese-American experience in California. And if we don't do it, and this network could create that, if we are not the ones doing it, it's not going to be, the state that's going to go out and create a curriculum for all of the ethnic groups that compose the state. It's going to be some of these groups And having educators create this curriculum it's the only way. It can't be, the Holy Ghost Society of city X, Y, or Z. It has to be a group of educators who understand curriculum, in this case, social studies, and who can create something around the Portuguese-American experience. So, and it's wonderful to see. We have Victor Hozza in Hanford High School, who's administrator, Lucy Ferreira Van Sayak here in Tulare. We have Isabel Cabral Johnson in Hilmar. We have, I can't think of the lady's name, but the superintendent for Turlock is also Portuguese. We have some in the Bay Area. We have some in Southern California. And now, probably the most famous one is Alberto Carvalho, who is the new superintendent for Los Angeles Unified, which is the second largest school district in the United States of America. And Alberto is an immigrant from Lisbon, Portugal, came to the United States at the age of 14 and became now the superintendent of the second largest school district in the United States. And he is really, I've had the opportunity of talking to him a couple of times. He's really an interesting and, very Portuguese man, willing to help anyone he can. So we have a lot to do and a lot of different opportunities. I had promised you about an hour and we are just about out of time. And so I'm going to ask both of you any final comments on this and a little bit of a pitch. And of course, Linda actually is in an upper hand here with you and I because she's a communications teacher. So she can communicate. So she can come up with those words, boom, 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 boom. And second of all, she's filho do António Carvalho. So as we say in Portuguese, filho de peixe sabe nadar. And so if you're, she has the upper hand to both of us here. But we're going to have her go first anyway. And any final thoughts? And what would you say, both of you, and we'll start with Linda, what would you say to any educator out there that said, this is kind of an interesting idea. Maybe I'll consider it. Maybe. Push them over the edge in the good sense of the word, Linda.
I think it's funny. I do think it's genetic, though. I think the whole communicating thing is genetic. I think more than anything, this gives us an opportunity to talk about our stories. And I would hopefully encourage anyone who's a Portuguese-American educator or someone in the educational field. It doesn't matter what grade level you teach, even if you're teaching kindergarten, join this, because no matter what, we're going to work together to learn something. We're going to kind of learn this process together. I would love to know more myself about Portuguese poetry, Portuguese short stories. I would love to see who is part of the Portuguese-American Educational Leadership Network. I think it'd be a great way to meet each other, to connect, and to celebrate our Portuguese heritage, which I think is incredibly important. And I think it's a story we don't want to lose. So I hope that everybody joins us so that whatever you have to share and whatever you know about the Portuguese community can be new information that the rest of us can embrace and learn, and we can learn from each other. So I really do hope that people sign up for this.
It's something we don't want to lose. Thank you. Those are wise words. Ashley.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very excited about it. I think it's definitely needed. We are, we may not be the biggest minority group, but it is something that you'd be surprised how many Portuguese people are in education. Like Denise mentioned, just the 44 teachers you knew in Tulare, right? And I think the more you start talking to people and promoting it, the more you'll find that, wow, we have, a lot of hands in the cookie jar, right? And I think it would be great if we had people from all aspects, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a teacher's aide, whether you're the attendance secretary at an elementary school. Like, there are so many roles in education that it would be, and like you mentioned, Linda, like the hiring process, it's different for everybody. It's different at a community college than it is at a university, than it is at a high school. So just, I think having everybody be able to share their stories about their experience in education, but then also to share the stories of Portuguese culture, traditions. And I know in our family, we've tried to keep a lot of those alive, but like Denise said, as generations pass on, unfortunately, things do just kind of slowly but surely you stop doing certain things. And I'm gonna take my son to his second festa this summer, and he's 6 years old. Are you kidding me? I had already been to like 100. You know what I mean? So like, I need to get with it. I need to start practicing what I'm preaching. So that's my goal this summer. But yeah, I think, like I said, in being in education, you're a lifelong learner. And I think if we can get people on board, it'll kind of spread like wildfire, because everybody's going to be passionate, not only about being Portuguese American, but about education and about keeping that education alive for our culture.
And that's such a great point, Ashley. Education is not just in the classroom. And so when you talk about, some people want to work in education, some people, and I've met plenty of them when I worked in high school. Some people want to be, they like being with kids. They're good with kids, but they don't want to teach. They don't want to be in a classroom setting, but they don't mind being, they want to be a secretary, or they want to be a custodian that works in a school where they can talk to students and actually be, in Tulare, we have one of the bus drivers who's was a soccer player and a soccer fanatic. And I think every single student that goes through his bus knows about Sporting, Benfica, and Tularense. And so it's just, these are other roles that sometimes we take for granted, but they're very important and they're very powerful for kids. Because sometimes it's not just a teacher in the classroom, but it's the bus driver that takes him or her home. It's the cafeteria worker that gives him or her the food. It's that counselor, etc. So indeed, we want all of you that are in education in one form or another to be part of our network. Again, thank you to Dr. Linda Carvalho-Cooley. Thanks to Ashley Fagundes. Thanks to all of you for joining us. It's called the Portuguese-American Leadership Network. And educators, I should say. Let me rephrase that again. Portuguese-American Educators Leadership Network. We will put out the link where folks can register. It's free of charge. And as we move forward, basically this semester, which is coming to an end, believe it or not, in 2 months, this semester will be for us to build the network, but hopefully, and throughout the summer, but hopefully next semester we can already put forth a couple of events with Portuguese American educators, also at a not just a public level like we are doing right now, but also some private Zoom meetings that we can all meet and talk about some goals to achieve with this network. Thanks, Ashley. Thanks, Linda. Thanks for all of you who joined us again on behalf of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute at California State University, Fresno. We want to thank all of you. I want to just real quick to share one thing with you before we leave, which is if you follow what we do here through PBBI. So we actually do have a couple events. This is the one we're having, of course, today. All of our events are at the Fresno State's Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute YouTube page. So it's Fresno State PBBI. We literally have over 300 hours of everything from panel discussions to oral history to in Portuguese and English. It's about 70% in English and 30% in Portuguese. And so look at it. They're all archived there, and they are being archived at a slower pace, but they are being archived at the Henry Madden Library of Fresno State. And when I mean a slower pace, not because the library has been just super excellent. Dr. Del Rita Hornbuckle and her staff are amazing. It's because we have to transcribe everything, when we put it. So transcription takes money and takes time. And so we have to transcribe everything, but we are slowly putting those up as well. And our next event is going to be tomorrow. It's part of our oral history. We're doing about 80% of our oral history in English and 20% in Portuguese. This one's called Dos Açores à Califórnia, Percursos Interculturais. Intercultural Trajectories, and it's with a young man from the freguesia of Ribeirinha in Terceira Azores. His name is José Ribeiro. I see Linda doing the yes, and José has an interesting story. He's one of our cantoria singers, and so it's unfortunately not many of them left in California. What we try to do with our oral history project is register about 70% of them in English and 30% in Portuguese, because we also would like to keep the language alive, and that's a topic for another discussion that Linda and I have had many different times, including on these panels as well. Again, thank you all. Take care, and keep on supporting PBBI at Fresno State. Thank you both, Linda and Ashley, one more time. Thank you. Bye-bye.